All right, time for us to get started. Turn your Bibles to Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7 as we begin our study of God's Word, which is part of the spiritual growth process. Worship God, study His Word, love one another, and reach the lost. And this chapter is really awesome. We have, as far as Daniel is concerned, we have studied the first 6 chapters. We've also studied some from Ezekiel in this quarter. And we're kind of just going through the period of the captivity and then the return from captivity and the years of silence in these 2 quarters. And so we're not hitting every single chapter of all of these books, but the chapters that really sort of move the plot along. And so that's what we're going to be doing today in Daniel chapter 7. The first 6 chapters of Daniel, what are they basically about? If you were to summarize the kind of, language that's in chapters 1 through 6, the kind of style, what is happening? What is the nature of chapters 1 through 6?
It's more about punishment for sin.
Okay, all right. Well, there's definitely that. The dominion of God is the main idea.
History?
Yeah, history. It's history. Chapters 7 through 12 are dreams and visions, all right? So we're not going to study all of this 7 through 12. There's some difficult stuff here. But chapter 7 and chapter 9 really help us to understand more about the things that will happen in the coming years and the years of silence and with the rest of the captivity. And I just want to tell you, of all of the passages in the Bible that are faith-building, and I'm thinking of passages like Isaiah 53 or like Isaiah 13 and the prophecy of the fall of Babylon. So many other passages I could think of, like messianic prophecies. This chapter and chapter 9 are, to me, 2 of the most faith-building chapters in the whole Bible. It is absolutely astounding to me. And so I hope that your faith will be built. Now here's what Daniel 7 is about. Daniel's dream of 4 beasts. He has this dream of 4 beasts, and the message that he gets from that dream is this: God is still in control. So that's going to be the main point that I drive home in the class today. That's the main point that is driven home in Daniel chapter 7. God is still in control. And so let's start here in Daniel 7. The first 14 verses tell us about that dream. The first verse kind of sets it up. It says, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and had visions in his mind as he lay on his bed, and he wrote down the dream and related the following summary of it. All right, so Belshazzar, we've talked about Belshazzar when we were in chapter 5. Brian taught about that. And what do we know about Belshazzar? Anything you know about Belshazzar?
His son.
All right. He was actually the son of the real king. Remember who the real king was?
Nebuchadnezzar.
Well, it was Nabonidus, but yeah, he was a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar, of course. But the actual king was Nabonidus, but Belshazzar was the acting king, and he was the last king of Babylon, because we've already talked about his death, right? That happened in chapter 5 when the army of the Medo-Persians came in and defeated Babylon. Remember that quick, swift defeat. So Belshazzar is already dead, but now we're going back in time to when he began his reign. We don't know the exact year of this, but it's probably about 17 years prior to where we were in Daniel's life. So we're maybe around 555 BC. So now, instead of Daniel being in his 80s, he may be more like in his 60s. He's a little bit younger version of himself in this particular story that we're looking at in chapter 7. So the dream is then described in verses 2 through 14. And instead of just reading it, I want to just kind of talk through it and you to help me remember the things that are in it. All right? So to start with, there's the sea that he sees, and the 4 winds of the heavens are just blowing and tossing this sea. So I just want you to picture that. Just picture this stormy sea. And then out of the sea there comes a beast. And just imagine seeing this, and coming up, there's this beast. What does he look like? The first beast. What is it like?
A lion.
A lion. A lion. Had 2 wings. Now, of course, Babylon was associated with the symbol of a lion, right? So we're going to talk a little bit later about what all these beasts mean. By the way, you're not allowed to talk about what these mean yet, all right? I just broke that rule a little bit, but don't spoil it yet. We'll get to that later in the divine interpretation, but first I just want us to see what Daniel saw. If you want to understand what Daniel understood, you have to see what he saw first. So he sees this beast, and it's this lion-looking creature with 2 wings, and then what happens to the beast? His wings are plucked off, and he's made to stand upright, and he's given the mind of a man. So it's like a humanoid lion thing. Man, it'd be strange. Second beast. There's another beast that comes up, and what does this beast look like? It looks like a bear. Now, it doesn't call it a bear, but it resembled a bear. But this was one deformed-looking bear. Because why? What was it about this bear that looked strange?
He had some ribs.
Well, first, he's got one side lifted up higher than the other side. And he's got these ribs in his mouth, and his voices are telling him, "Arise, devour much meat." All right. And then, there's a third beast that comes up. And what does this one resemble? A leopard. So let's kind of remember that those 3 animals that these beasts resemble. First is a lion, second is a bear, third is a leopard. Now this leopard-like beast has wings, 4 wings and 4 heads, and he's got much dominion. This is one powerful 4-headed, 4-winged leopard, okay? and Daniel's just watching. I mean, talk about a bizarre dream. We've all had bizarre dreams, but this one gets really bizarre here soon. I mean, like psychedelic. So the 4th beast, what animal does it resemble? It's kind of a trick question. Doesn't resemble any animal. I just kind of picture, and I'm not trying to be flippant, but I just kind of picture a beast that looks something like Godzilla, like almost a dinosaur-looking creature that comes up. And let's just read a little bit of his description. Look in verse 7. It says, "After this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth." Now that would be creepy. His teeth are made out of iron. "It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns." So this beast with 10 horns, and he's just, man, this thing is scary. And then the next verse talks about there's another horn. Now this is where the dream gets really crazy. This little horn. Now later it says that the horn was bigger than the other, so it becomes bigger. But at first it's little and insignificant. Uproots 3 other of the horns as it comes up. And what's really strange about that horn? It had eyes and a mouth. And it starts talking. What kind of things is it saying? Boastful words, right? Oh, that is one, that is a horn with an attitude. And Daniel is he's got to just be so confused, right? But that's not the end of the dream. Thankfully, there is more. And so in verses 9 through 12, we have the Ancient of Days judging these beasts. Look in verses 9 and 10 with me. "I kept looking," and I want you to picture this. Just picture it. "I kept looking until thrones were set up." So are you seeing that in your mind's eye? See multiple thrones. "And the Ancient of Days took his seat. His vesture was like white snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was ablaze with flames. Its wheels were a burning fire." Who is the Ancient of Days? This is Yahweh. This is God. He's on a chariot throne. Remember, we talked about a chariot throne in Ezekiel 1. This is a chariot throne. Yes, God's people are in Babylon in captivity, but God is God everywhere. His throne isn't just in one place. So this throne has wheels. Verse 10, a river of fire was flowing and coming out from before him, and thousands upon thousands were attending him, and myriads upon myriads were standing before him. This is a grandiose scene. It's a terrifying scene. The court sat, and the books were open. So now we're seeing all these books. So kind of powerful here. In Revelation 22, there is described there God on his throne, and there is a river that flows from his throne in Revelation 22. What kind of river was that in Revelation 22? River of the waters of life. Here there's a river flowing from the throne. What kind of river is it? A river of fire. See any difference? This is judgment. Now, I will just go and tell you, this is not talking about the final judgment. This is talking about a particular judgment on nations, and we're going to get into that. But this is larger than life symbolic language. Now, here's the thing, and some of y'all are maybe new to this class, and you haven't heard me say this. Whenever you have passages like this, the symbols are not the reality. So there's no such thing as those four beasts, right? They are symbols to represent a spiritual reality, all right? So there are a lot of things, even about the Ancient of Days on his throne, that are still symbolic, but have a spiritual truth behind them, right? So always ask, what is the spiritual truth behind the symbol? Don't get distracted about the symbol so much. That's where people go off. Like I've told people before, I used to say that Stone is a tornado. My son, Stone, when he was little, I said, that boy is a tornado. And what I meant by that is not he's a literal cycle of wind that spins around in the air and destroys houses. What I meant is that little boy makes messes everywhere he goes. Little Stone was a tornado. And so the symbol is, the tornado. The reality is messes. That's the truth behind the symbol. So always ask that when you see symbols in this kind of language here. What is the truth behind the symbol? So, as verses 11 and 12 continue there, the beast, that fourth beast, is taken, slain, thrown into the fire, destroyed. And the other beasts have their dominion taken away from them. And then, verses 13 and 14, this vision gets even better. I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, one like a son of man was coming. And he came up to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion, glory, and a kingdom, that all the peoples, nations, and men of every language might serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. He said, one like a son of man. All Daniel knew is this looks like a human being. Who do we know that is? It is Jesus. It is Jesus, who was a son of man. He was human. All that term means is a human being. And he was divine at the same time. And, of course, Jesus has received his eternal kingdom. He's already received that, hasn't he? I mean, he's ruling now in heaven. We understand that he's already received his eternal kingdom, and we're a part of that kingdom. This is a prophecy of Jesus receiving the kingdom almost 600 years before it happened. We understand what this prophecy is about. Daniel had no clue. Think about that. Daniel, who understood all mysteries, and who was the one that interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 2. That same Daniel, he can't figure this dream out. But we know what it means. You think about what a blessing that is. But this passage in 1 Peter 1, Daniel fits in this verse, in this passage, these two verses. As to this salvation, the prophets who prophesied of the grace that would come to you made careful searches and inquiries, seeking to know what person or time the Spirit of Christ within them was indicating as he predicted the sufferings of Christ and the glories to follow. Don't you know Daniel wanted to know, who's this person that looks like a human being receiving this kingdom? We have knowledge that Daniel didn't have. We need to be thankful for that. In fact, one of the spiritual blessings that are listed in Ephesians chapter 1 is that God made known to us the mystery of His will, which is Jesus Christ. And so that mystery has been revealed. When's the last time in our prayer lives that we stopped and we said, God, I just want to thank you for revealing the mystery to me, to us. I want to thank you that you have explained the things that the prophets of old didn't understand. What a tremendous blessing that is. Absolutely. And to go back to the main point, God is still in control. That is the point that is really driven home in this dream. The people are in captivity. It could appear God's not in control, but hey, God's in control. He sees where all of this is headed, and ultimately He has a purpose that is far grander and greater than really was imaginable, and He's going to accomplish that will. So I'll pause here. Any comments, any questions before we move forward? But you're not allowed to talk about kingdoms. Terry?
Just on the grandeur in the vision, it's easy for me to see how the Jews, especially when they were in captivity at this time, were thinking of an earthly kingdom, not thinking spiritual things, waiting for the one to come and rule all the world. And how hard it would be to think that this carpenter, is our king. Right. It makes sense.
Yeah, and so as we're going to move forward, the typical view that people have of this is it's talking about something still yet future. Jesus is going to come. He's going to establish a kingdom on earth, and this 1,000-year kingdom on earth. That's the view that, and I call that Christian mythology. That is the view that has just perpetuated Christendom at large. What I call consumer Christianity is kind of what the world of Christendom has become today. It's a consumer product. And if you really want to sell Christianity, Christian mythology is exciting. Premillennialism, Left Behind, there's the product. But that's not what this is talking about. It's not talking about something that is still yet future. As we're going to see, these are things that have already taken place. And that's, to me, why it is so faith-building. Because we can look back and say, look, that was fulfilled. All right, other thoughts? Randy?
I just was thinking of a parallel in that Daniel lived almost his entire life in captivity in a foreign land. And yet, in a way, we do too. This earth is not our home. And he stayed faithful. And we're expected to stay faithful. Good. And it really should be even easier for me knowing the mystery.
Amen.
Maybe it's verse 12 for it's talking about the three other beasts, and it says an extension of life was granted to them for an appointed period of time. Think about what the New Testament is written in, what it was originally written in, and how that served God's purpose. They had this extension, for that appointed time that He had set, and He's still in control.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, there certainly wasn't the judgment on those first three beasts as there was on that fourth beast. And and we'll get a little bit more into that. But yeah, the Grecian kingdom and the Greek language and the Greek way of life, that had tremendous influence even in the Roman Empire. Very good. All right, the rest of the chapter is a divine interpretation of this dream. And so first we see the basic meaning, the basic overall meaning of the dream. Whoops. And so Daniel, he's very disturbed, he's distressed, he's alarmed about this dream, and he wants to know what it means. So there's someone standing by in his vision that he asks. And in verse 17, that person says, "These great beasts, which are four in number, are four kings who will arise from the earth." Now that actually means kingdoms. The word king here is being used to represent kingdoms. And I'll show you a little bit later in the passage whether I'll actually read that or not actually. But it clearly tells us these are kingdoms. Okay? But here it says kings, but it means kingdoms. Verse 18, "But the saints of the highest one will receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever for all ages to come. Well, I'm sure Daniel is thinking, that helped a little, but I would like a little bit more information. But, all right, so for starters, we know that those four are four kingdoms. Now, Daniel didn't know the details that we're going to know exactly what these kingdoms are at this point. But so I want us to see that this dream is a parallel to Nebuchadnezzar's dream from chapter 2. What happened in that dream that Nebuchadnezzar had in chapter 2? Sorry?
Broken heart.
Okay. So there was a statue, 4 different parts. Stone hits the feet. What happens to the statue? It is absolutely decimated and destroyed. And then what happens to that stone? It grows, doesn't it? It becomes a mountain that fills up the whole earth. And Daniel 2 and verse 44 says, in the days of those kings, and it's talking about the kings in the days of the Roman Empire, in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, but it will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, and it itself will endure forever. Same exact parallel dream. Parallel meaning from that dream to this dream. And so let's kind of break that down. So here's the image. And first of all, the head of gold. What does the head of gold represent in that dream in chapter 2? That's Babylon. And so this first beast that came up out of the sea, this beast that looked like a lion, is the same as that head of gold. It represents Babylon, the kingdom. Right? What about the chest and arms of silver? What did that represent? All right, that was Medo-Persia. Now, it was a combination of 2 empires. Does anybody know which one of those 2 was more powerful, Media or Persia? It was the opposite. It was Media. It was far more powerful. And so that's what. And so you have the bear that's lopsided. He's raised up on one side because there was those 2 kingdoms, and one was more powerful than the other. You had the third part of the statue, which was the belly and thighs of brass, represented what kingdom? That is Greece. And so that third beast that resembled a leopard with 4 heads and 4 wings was Greece, stood for Greece, right? By the way, I can't say this for sure, but it is really interesting that after Alexander the Great died in 323, and over the next 40 years, his successors kind of battled for control. When everything was said and done, the kingdom was split into how many parts? 4 parts. 4 parts. So that might be what the 4 heads represent. What do the 4 wings represent? I don't know, but Alexander the Great, by age 30, had spread his kingdom all the way from Asia Minor to India. I mean, it was insane how quickly he did that. So those wings, those 4 wings, might represent the speed at which the Grecian Empire was established. I say might because I don't know. If I don't know, I'm not going to pretend like I know. And we shouldn't either. If you don't know, just say, here's what I think, and I'll give you the reasons for it. If you know, say I know, and show them why in the Bible you know. All right, the fourth part of that statue, the legs of iron and feet of iron and clay mixed, represented obviously what kingdom? Rome. And so that fourth beast, the one that came up out of the sea that just was terrifying, iron teeth, represented Rome. You see the iron connection, iron teeth, iron legs, obviously a connection there. Now, I just want us to stop and stand in awe of something here. This is hundreds of years in advance. It's telling of the rising and falling of nations to come in the centuries that follow, and of the establishment of God's kingdom in the days of the Roman Empire. If that's not faith building to you, I don't know what could be. In fact, Daniel is, it's like a playground for critics, because they love to attack the book of Daniel, because there's no way in their mind, there's no way all that stuff was really, revealed by Daniel back then. It had to be written way later, after all those events happened, and then inserted back here and made it look like it was revealed in the day of Daniel, which makes the book of Daniel, basically just fraud. And you know what I think people that do that kind of work need to do? I think they need to get a new job. If you're going to study the Bible, study the Bible. And the reason it's so mind-blowing is because there was no way that those things could have been revealed back there at the time of Daniel unless what is true? Unless what is true? Unless 1 Timothy 3:16 and 17 is true. All Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, reproof, correction, and so forth. All Scripture is God-breathed. That's the only way that prediction could be made back there. It's phenomenal.
I think you mean Daniel 7.
Yeah, sorry, I was thinking 4 beasts.
Yeah, or verse 4.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
No, I was thinking 4 beasts.
We
So.
have visitors. I want to make sure the visitors.
You caught that. That's good. That's good. All right. Any other thoughts on that before we move forward? Ms. Catherine?
To go along with what you just said, and that all Scripture is God breathed. I was having a conversation with someone one day, and we were disagreeing about something, and I said, well, the Bible is not an a la carte menu. You don't get to pick and choose what you believe, and then it's taken in its entirety. And she said, no, actually it is. So it kind of took me aback, and I think that she said to me, she said, well, if you believe that, it all comes from the Holy Spirit, and and all these people who wrote it are all getting, like, well, yes. So it's amazing how it can be so misinterpreted.
Yeah.
When you do start to take it as I say, an a la carte menu, and say, oh, well, Daniel wasn't written here, it was written there. And when you start picking it apart like that and say, well, no, that's when everything starts to go awry.
That's exactly right.
And it goes with the
All
premillennialism and
Scripture.
everything that you
All
were talking
Scripture.
about to me.
Yes.
Yeah, that
That's
kind of
great.
stunned me when this person who says she's Catholic says, well, yeah, of course it is. And it's a family member.
Yeah.
So.
And that's a fairly common, view that people have, that we can kind of pick and choose what we want in the Bible. And if it's all inspired, that doesn't make sense, does it? Let's pick this inspired part and not that one. Of course, we're no longer under the Old Covenant, but it still has much for us in terms of value and understanding. Okay. Brian, did you have something? I'm sorry.
Yeah, just real quick. Probably what I see as one of the greatest errors too with these texts is every generation wants to apply it to their generation. And if that's the case, then that means Daniel 7 is forever shifting.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so it's talking about Obama as a horn, and but now that's over, so now it's Trump. So now he's the little horn, and I'm sure hundreds of years they were talking about Hitler. He's the horn,
Or the Pope.
Yeah,
That's the
exactly.
big one, right? Everybody thinks it's the Pope.
Sure,
Pope.
so that's just so dangerous.
Oh yeah, no, it's every mayor that comes along, and this symbol represents, the mayor's horse. And, people they take things and they literalize them and make it apply to whatever they see in their culture right around them. That's a huge mistake, absolutely. Let's see. So verses 19 through 22 there, Daniel is curious. He wants to know more about this fourth beast, and particularly he wants to know about these horns, these 10 horns, and especially that one horn that spoke boastful words. And in verse 21, he says, I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was passed in favor of the saints of the highest one, and the time arrived when the saints took possession of the kingdom. So not only is this horn on the head of this beast speaking boastful words, now he's actually waging war. And I'm not sure what that looked like in Daniel's dream, for this little horn on the top of a beast to be waging war. But he was. And then as we continue here, we have further divine interpretation of the dream. And so let me ask you, because you've studied, I trust that you all read the chapter and and did all that. What did the 10 horns represent on the head of that beast? Don't all answer at once. Kings. 10 kings. And so apparently that would be emperors of Rome. What 10? Oh, I mean, commentators have gone nuts figuring out which 10. There were more than 10. We don't know. In fact, here's the thing to realize about numbers in language like this. Usually the numbers are symbolic. What's 10 a number? What's that symbolic for? Completion. So the number 10, these 10 kings, could just be a symbolic way of saying all the kings of that Roman Empire. Okay, that's what the 10 horns might represent. Then you have this one horn that comes up. What does that one horn represent?
Somebody who would speak against.
Okay, and particularly, if he's one of the horns, then what is he? He's a king. And he uproots the role of 3 other kings before him and wages war and speaks against God and so forth. Now, what I want us to do is something that's really cool. This is just so awesome. We're going to go to Revelation 13 and see a really clear connection with Revelation 13 and Daniel 7. So let's turn there. This is just really exciting to me. So in Revelation chapter 12, Daniel has a vision, and I know I said turn to Revelation 13, but I'm setting it up. In chapter 12, he saw this vision of a big red dragon. Remember that? 7 heads, 10 horns, a tail that swept a third of the stars of heaven. He tried to devour this baby that represents Christ in this vision. And then he tried to attack the woman that gave birth to the baby, which represents the people of God. And he failed. And then we have in verse 1 of chapter 13, it says, it says, and the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. So I want you to picture that great big red dragon in this vision. He's standing on the seashore of the sea. Then it says, then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 diadems, kingly, and on his heads were blasphemous names. Pause. If you're a student of the Old Testament, if you're familiar with Daniel chapter 7, and you come to this passage in Revelation, now picture you're a first century saint, and this book is written in all this cryptic language so as to kind of avoid the attention and the understanding of the Roman Empire of what this message actually is. And you come to this and you start reading about a beast coming up out of the sea. What immediately comes to your mind? Daniel 7, and that these beasts, anytime that in Daniel 7 there was a beast coming up out of the sea, what did it represent? A kingdom. So immediately, if you're a Bible student, you're going, I know what this means. This is a kingdom. This is a kingdom. Look at verse 2. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon, that represents Satan in the vision, gave him his power and throne and great authority. All right, leopard, bear, lion. Connection with Daniel 7? What was that first beast looking like in Daniel 7? What did it look like? Like a lion. What did the second one look like? Like a bear. What did the third one look like? Like a leopard. Now here it's different because these aren't 4 different beasts that look like each of these, the 3 that look like these and then one other that had a different appearance. Instead, this is one beast that has composite parts of all of those others. Because Rome, and that's what this beast represents, Rome had within it elements from the previous nations. And so it kind of embodied that. Now, go on and read here. Look in verse 5. There was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies. Well, what does that kind of sound like? Same thing that horn was doing. Or you go on down you go on down to verse 6, and he opened his mouth and blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Verse 7, it was also given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. So, obviously, that's the same exact things we read about that horn doing in Daniel 7. And what this is supposed to clue us in on is this is talking about the same thing. The same kingdom, the Roman Empire, and a ruler who's going to just really resist God. Now, we don't know what ruler specifically Daniel 7 was talking about with that horn. There were a lot of Roman emperors that resisted God. I believe the book of Revelation was written during the reign of Domitian, and that particular emperor who was waging a terrible persecution against Christians. So that could be what that horn in Daniel 7 represents, but I can't say that for sure. But I'll tell you what it doesn't represent. It doesn't represent the Antichrist. Because there is no future being that has that specific title that is coming. Anyone that resists Christ and does not believe in Him, 1 John tells us, and 2 John, is the Antichrist. Your boss might be the Antichrist. Your wife or your husband might be the Antichrist. Okay. But no, the thing is, Rome has already been destroyed. And by the way, this goes on to tell of how this beast was destroyed. In fact, in chapter 22, the beast was thrown into a lake that burns with fire and brimstone. What is that like? Remember in Daniel 7? That fourth beast thrown into a... So there's so many similarities, you see. And so that fourth beast in Daniel 7 is definitely Rome. Rome has already been destroyed. Christ's kingdom was established. It was established. He raised from the dead, and He was declared king at His resurrection of the dead. I can show you passages in Acts 2 and in Acts 13 that make that point. When He ascended into heaven, I think that's specifically what Daniel 7, 13 and 14 is talking about. This Son of Man being presented before the Ancient of Days as He is just coronated as king. And then, of course, in Acts chapter 2, that's when the kingdom came as we see and know the kingdom here on earth. That spiritual kingdom was established in the establishment of the church. That's the fulfillment. And it's so powerful. God is still in control. Now here's the thing. No, there's not going to be a revived Roman Empire and some Roman ruler, and Christ is not going to come and establish some kingdom on earth. That's Christian mythology, that's a consumer product, and it's not what the Bible teaches. But Jesus is going to return. And He is going to not only destroy Rome, He's going to destroy this entire earth with fire. And He's going to establish His kingdom in its fullest sense. The kingdom is already established, but it's still a process even of that ultimately being established in the fullest sense at the consummation of all things, at the end of time. His kingdom will be established in its fullest sense when He has put all of His enemies under His feet and subjected even Satan, who will be thrown into the lake that burns with fire and brimstone. God is still in control. We're on the winning side. You see? It's so easy to think, it just feels like we're losing. I mean, who is the prince of this world? Satan. And he's still got a lot of sparrows in his bag, doesn't he? In fact, the majority of humanity, are sparrows in the bag of Satan, still under his power, under his control. But God is still in control. God knows where everything is headed. He has an overarching plan. He knows the rising and falling of the nations that will come, even what will happen to America. And He knows that ultimately His purpose will be done, and He will be glorified for all eternity. He's still in control, no matter what this world looks like. That's awesome. And that has powerful, practical implications for our daily lives. And that's where I'm going to open up for comments. We do have like 5 minutes. So I've purposefully not taken so many comments so that we could have more discussion here at the end. So what does this mean for our lives on a practical level that God is still in control? Any thoughts or comments? Terry?
You're on the winning side. If you choose God, then everything's going to be all right.
You're on the winning side. Absolutely. Amen. Brian?
It helps you endure, helps you have more perseverance when we suffer in this life. Bad things happen, evil things happen. You just know there's something, God knows what's going on behind the scenes, even if I don't understand. And if I just stay faithful to Him, He'll take care of me. He's all.
I love that. Yeah, I love what you said, that God knows what's going on behind the scenes. The years of silence are the years when there's the rising and falling of these kingdoms that are prophesied about here. Okay? And the years of silence, I kind of explained, it's like the curtains were closed because God was no longer communicating. He was no longer giving revelation. So it's like you're watching a play and it's the end of a scene and they close the curtains. And you go, well, it doesn't look like anything's happening. But there's a lot happening. And so we might look around today and we might feel powerless and feel like, well, God's not really doing anything. But behind the curtains, He is setting the stage for the next scene. He is busy. Christ is busy, subjecting all of His enemies under His feet, right? And so God's plan is still being unfolded. And yeah, I think, Brian, that's absolutely right. That is empowering. And it should make us feel not defeated. It's so easy to feel defeated every day, but we're really supposed to feel victorious because we are reigning with Christ in a sense, even right now, as Ephesians 2 talks about, sitting in heavenly places. And ultimately, we're going to sit in heavenly places and reign with God in heaven. All right, other comments, other thoughts? What does this mean for our lives? That God is still in control.
Well, I think too, just kind of along the same lines, just that we can, kind of in combination with what the Lord's Supper talks about, that we can feel empowered and we can feel redeemed and we can feel like, that we have been released and we are free and we need to get busy letting other people know that.
Yeah.
And so to have that confidence and that joy and that, that we can let people know it's going to be okay.
Embrace,
on the right side.
I love that. We need to really embrace the spiritual freedom that Christ has gone to so much trouble to give us and to realize that the gospel really is good news. Why don't we share it with people? Because we think it's bad news. It's not. It's good news. It gives people hope and freedom. So yeah, absolutely. Great thoughts. Anybody else? Somebody who hasn't spoken yet? Anybody have any thoughts? Yes, sir.
I think it really shows the consistency of the entire Bible, where you see the obvious connection between Daniel chapter 7 and Revelation, not just chapter 12 and 13, but constantly throughout the entire book, as that book was written to churches of Asia during that time that was struggling through the persecution of the Roman Empire. And that consistent message of God is still in control, and He will reward those that are faithful to Him. And you see, Revelation 2 verse 10, be faithful until death, and I'll give you the crown of life. So it's that idea of consistency throughout both the Old Testament and the New Testament, and the promise given to us today.
That's it. The Bible is really one narrative. It's one narrative. Think about that. 40 different authors, 1,500 years, put together one narrative that fits together. And it's basically the story of the redemption of mankind. It's so faith-building, it's so uplifting, it's so encouraging. And yes, and this came to my mind, and y'all have heard me say this a lot. If we want to understand the New Testament, guess what we have to first understand? You got to understand the Old. You're not going to understand Revelation without an understanding of the Old Testament, especially the prophets. Daniel, for example, is going to greatly enhance your understanding of Revelation 13. And so, yes, there's that consistency and that connection all throughout. Great comment. Great thought. All right. Well, we're pretty much out of time. Hope that was encouraging to everybody. Please read through page 69 and study Daniel chapter 9. Study it. It's a tough one, but it's awesome. And I'm excited to present that to y'all on Wednesday night.